Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So nice to be here. I'm going to have a look at how you can use your institutional repository to ensure the sustainability of open research. But first, I'm going to try and figure out how to move this slide along using this clicker. Here we go. So I am from Figshare, but it's important to note that there are a plurality of repository solutions out there. And the reason I want to highlight this is because any institutional repository to support sustainability really has to make its outputs fair. If you're unfamiliar with FAIR, it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And how this supports sustainability basically is all the effort that goes into research, making sure that it's findable, basically make sure that you get in both parts of scholarly communications. If people can't connect with your content, then you're only doing the first part of that. Ways that repositories make content findable are assigning a persistent identifier. That also makes it citable as well. Data should be described with a rich metadata that is configurable. This is really helpful when it comes to being able to enrich a record in a discipline-specific way, and it also helps reporting on those items as well. And to make those items findable, you also need to have an index where people are basically searching for that content. You need to place that content where people are looking for it. In terms of accessibility, that first point is just a really practical thing around making sure that somebody can actually practically access the content. There shouldn't be a sign-up, login, or paywall in the way of your output and your intended audience. And just a secondary point to that, of course, is that not everything can or should be made open, and the facility, though, to highlight that something exists as a metadata-only record really helps in terms of having visibility to the fact that something exists, if not the actual content itself. And repositories should integrate with long-term preservation systems for institutions that need that greater assurance around the longer-term preservation of those particular items. And then interoperable. So the repository landscape is quite a constellation, and repositories need to talk to other systems in the research infrastructure landscape, none the least national repositories, national data registers, and having languages represented in different formats and being able to have interoperability standards facilitate that is really important. In terms of metadata schemas, if they're flexible and configurable, then they can be made fair, and the facility to provide a link to the peer-reviewed publication really supports that green open access route, as well as gives you researchers 2 bites of the cherry when it comes to here's my data, here's my output. So both can be cited, which is really nice. And then reusability. So having your data out there and produced as something that's supporting a particular study is fantastic, and it's good practice, but it may be that that data is going to be used years later in a way that the original researcher never even conceived. So having something that has a clear and explicit license attached to it gives an end user some assurance around how that data can be reused, and it gives your researchers some assurance that the data is going to be reused in an appropriate way. And repositories should have the functionality that can also have a check on that as a process, right? There needs to be some curation around that workflow. And again, that gives you the assurance that your metadata is enriched properly, the license assigned is the correct license, and it gives your researcher that assurance that somebody else is checking. So that's how repositories can embrace FAIR principles to improve sustainability. The second part of my talk, I really want to focus on what that means for early career researchers, right? So the State of Open Data is a survey of up to 5,000 researchers, and as you can see, sharing data openly was the biggest reason for making outputs open. And that's good, that's great, it's a lovely carrot to have, and we know from Swan 2010 and others in the literature that there's a really direct impact from making items open to increasing citations. There's some variance in disciplines there, and that is a good thing. But this paradigm, as we know, has a bias, doesn't it? There's a citation bias for more established researchers. So what do we do with our early career researchers? How can we start to balance that playing field a little bit? One possibility is to use altmetrics and social media. And I appreciate that this is contingent on engagement with those things. In the literature, this is contested in terms of early career researchers might be more likely to use these things, but there's just as much literature counteracting that. But I'm not here to argue with that. I'm just saying this is one avenue where early career researchers can start to address this. So I don't know if you can see very clearly up there, but we've got nearly 4,000 views, nearly 1,000 downloads on this thesis. And I think that's in part to the altmetric attention that it's received. So this little donut here, we can see it's received like 16 pieces of attention, let's say. And the first thing we can see is where actually the supervisor and the first supervisor of this research graduate has tweeted about the researcher's sort of thesis, right? So this postgraduate researcher is able to leverage the network and the influence of their supervisors in order to gain a more attention, wider audience. And again, this is contingent on the supervisors being engaged and acting as a real promoter for this researcher, and I completely concede that. However, it has clearly benefited. Part of the reason it's being picked up by this media outlet, I'm sure, is because of that attention received by the supervisors. And if we have a look at that breakdown then of the global attention for this, the people that are interacting with this, so the one journalist is clearly the one media outlet, but we've got peer scientists, we've got members of the public, and when we think about this at this stage in this person's career as really impacting what they can evidence when they go on to postdoctoral work, when it comes to their next grant application, I think that's really powerful and is a really good message to be giving to our early career researchers. My next point is to publish data alongside research. The facility to be able to do that, as I mentioned, is really nice because you get citations on the data and it drives people back to the underpinning, supporting data that is in a static output. My next piece of advice is to publish open access as and where you can. A repository can really support this. So green open access, you can have the author-accepted manuscript there, which can point out to the version of record, or if it's gold or diamond open access, you can have that straight on the repository. I didn't quite realize I wouldn't have the facility to click the link through, but there's examples there if you want to go have a look at what that looks like in a repository. Preprints don't come without risks, and there is some concern around using preprints, but it is one way, it's one facility, isn't it, to have rapid dissemination, feedback, and to claim actually with the timestamp that prior intellectual property in case there's any contest around that. The other concern, I guess, is some publishers may consider this as pre-publication, but I think a lot of publishers are really being a lot more clearer now on making sure that preprints don't count as pre-publication. So that's good. My next point is to really embrace academic profiles. So your repository solution may have that as part of the repository. Your CRIS may have it, or there are obviously free versions like the Google Scholar profile. ORCID integration with your repository as well, that bi-directional harvesting of that content, pulling that in, making sure that your researchers aren't having to do that each time. If your institutional repository is not fit for purpose or you don't have one, you can self-archive in free things like Figshare.com, and deposit should be as easy as possible. I'm going to get booted off stage soon, so you just have to take my word for it that's not a bad workflow for that. Shout out to you guys. You're the guys that are creating the guidance around this, and there's just some examples where I think that's really good practice. There's some other initiatives that I've completely run out of time to mention, but please look them up. Thank you very much.